Right. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Litchfield Planning Board meeting of March 16th, 2021. Would you all please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic which stands one nation under God, with justice for all. All right.
Mike, you want to flip that sign down? Steve Weber in front of you.
Oh, I'm not Steve Weber, you're right. You know what?
See them or not. I did not.
Okay. Let's see, appointment of alternates. We don't have any alternates this evening. Yeah, no, we're all regular members. That's great. So I'll start with the roll call of members. Michael Croto, Chair.
Kimberly Queenan, Selectman's Rep.
Kate Stevens, Vice Chair.
Josh Smith, member.
James Buffetti, member.
Curtis Hanson, member on the phone.
Good evening. Hello to everybody and good evening to Jay. First of all, I just want to say congratulations to Kim for the new position of the Board of Selectmen. And congratulations to Kate for the Budget Committee. And we had the elections and also our zoning amendments passed. So that's good. So with that, as we start off again, just wanted to say congratulations to both of you and wish you well in your new positions. Before we begin, public input on non-agenda items not on the agenda for this evening. Do we have any public input on non-agenda items?
Mr. Chair, I don't see any members of the public attending tonight.
Thank you, John. Seeing none, I will close public input on non-agenda items. We'll go to the first order of business this evening. Master Plan Update Community Facilities Chapter. And I'm going to turn it over to Jay.
And actually, that'll be quick because I'm sorry to say I do not really have much to show this week. So far, what I've been able to do is pull together a lot of basic information. I've had a chance to talk to some of the key department heads, so that's information on staffing, levels, and general information on needs. So I've got a lot of stuff pulled together. I just have not yet pulled it together into a coherent chapter form. So sorry I've not made more progress on that, but I will get something to you very shortly so that you do have something to look at for the next workshop. Some of the stuff that we talked about that I was hoping to get, such as a plan for the town center area, I should say the municipal complex, I have not been able to get my hands on that. So I'm just going to go forward without it. We'll probably do some sort of text description, but I'm not going to have something that I can really show or work off of. So sorry for the brief update, but I will get you a draft chapter very shortly to take a look at.
Okay. Thank you. Number 2, regulation updates.
So I've got a few things to go through if I can share. Let me see which one I'm going to start with. Let me minimize my screen, bear with me. And I'm going to pull up a few different documents at once. So let me start with the expedited site plan review. And then related to that, can people see this document?
Not yet.
Not yet. Right. Sorry, I am.
That's okay.
Not sharing then. I'm going to have to do a little bit of jumping around because I don't think that I can share 2 at once. Sorry for my There we go. Let me zoom in on my own self. And I'm still not seeing my document.
Jay, I just made you presenter. Try it again.
There it is.
Can everyone see that?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, I'm going to have to do some jumping around. Bear with me on this because I'm going to have to jump to the existing site plan regulations for this to make sense. So just as a starting point, I'm going to switch to actor speaker mode. We've talked about a few different things at the last time we went through potential site plan or regulatory changes. So I'm going to talk to three of those today. Two of them are regulatory changes, one of them is a zoning change. So one was looking at the expedited review of farm buildings and minor site plans. The second one is parking. And then the third one is the possibility of looking at a model solar ordinance. And by the way, I couldn't figure out how to share any of these documents on the site. I think it's because we didn't have agenda items on the side. Technically, I'm sure there was a way, but I couldn't do it. So after the meeting, I'll talk to Joan and I'll figure out a way that we can share these, or I could just, I suppose, email them to everybody. So just as a starting point with this, the issue that was raised is one of the challenges in looking at our minor site plan requirements or the expedited review of minor site plans is really twofold. I'll walk through it and I think it'll be self-explanatory, and then I'm going to have to jump back, so I'll have a little bit of awkwardness. So first of all, we do have this section. Obviously, it applies to farm buildings, and it applies to minor site plans, which are actually can be fairly considerable with a developed area of up to 40,000 square feet or less, although key where no new habitable structures or significant expansions of existing structures are proposed. Probably the most recent example, I think that if I'm recalling correctly, that we've had of a minor site plan was Romano's. You may recall there was a fairly minor change to the existing building and that came before us at one point, and then there was a change to parking in the parking lot. And I think that caused some confusion in how the plans were presented and what the requirements really were. So these do come up periodically. So just jumping into the first area where you see a change is on 180.2. This is not something we've discussed, but basically you can't apply for a minor site plan review in the current wording for any commercial retail sales proposals, including farm stands or what are called sale outlets. Those have to get full site plan review. The reason I put in any new or expanded here is just to clarify that if there is a commercial activity, retail sales on the site, but they're not increasing it or adding to it, it probably doesn't make sense that they would have to go for site plan review. I think that's the intent, but I just tried to clarify that. I should say for full site plan review. This is really the section that significant changes were made to, and this is where I'm going to need to jump around, maybe. If you want me to jump around, I suppose I should say. So in this section, I think what's problematic with this section of the regulations is it says that the applicant shall request an expedited site plan review in writing. That's not problematic. But here, pre-application requirements, section 130, submission procedures, section 140, and neither of those are really problematic. Those basically just describe what you need to do in order to file a site plan, how many days before the meeting, that abutters are required, that a public notice is required. None of those are problematic. So section 130, section 140, again, those are not problematic. What is problematic is section 150. So basically this section says you have to meet all the requirements of 130, 140, and 150. If you meet all the requirements of these three sections, particularly section 150, that's a full site plan review. So in essence, we're saying that we have a procedure, we offer the opportunity to have an expedited review for minor site plans and for farm buildings, But in reality, this section says you have to meet all the requirements. And I don't think that's really the intent. So what I tried to do here is call out the sections that I don't think, certainly it'd be my opinion, that would be required for a minor site plan. And I'll turn that around and say it a different way. If, for example, a traffic impact study is warranted, it's probably not a minor site plan. That's a major site plan. So it's kind of an issue where I think by definition, if some of these things are really necessary to be reviewed, it really shouldn't be in this section of the regulations. So what I tried to do is call them out and just put in parentheses what they were. So the first is section 150.4, traffic impact study. Next, section 150.5, internal circulation plan. Again, if the site's that complicated, if the changes are so significant or complicated that they alter the internal circulation, you probably shouldn't be in this section. Renderings and illustrations, or I should say, section 150.6, renderings and illustrations as required under section 120.13. Again, I can jump to these sections for us to take a look at. What this section requires is that you show the building elevations for what you propose, but also for all buildings within 200 feet of the site. That's a really significant requirement. Generally, if you're doing a building, you're going to have a builder, or you're buying something prefab, or you're working with an architect, doing your own, providing a rendering of your own building or structure that you're proposing isn't that onerous. You inevitably have to do that anyway. But requiring that for buildings within 200 feet, that can be significant. That's a significant additional cost and requirement. So that's why I included that in this section. And then section 150.7, this is basically the checklist. And there are several items in here that I called out that I didn't feel made sense. And again, this is a section where we might want to go back and forth. Although I do have my site plan regulations. So you bear with me for just 1 second. I will call those out so you can see what I intended. And then again, if you feel that, that you want to really jump to these, we can. And by the way, stop me at any point. So the first one is D, and that's signature and seal of a registered surveyor, engineer, or architect. Kind of, once again, I think if your plan requires, engineering, it really doesn't belong here. It's a full-blown site plan. Generally, I would say the same thing for a surveyor or architect. Not that you don't have those people on your team necessarily, but requiring that signature and seal, I think, takes it to a higher level of plan. F, this is basically topography, contour intervals not greater than 2 feet. M, soil types and location of soil boundaries. P, location of all buildings within 200 feet. And there's more wordage here that I'm summarizing. Stormwater drainage plan, which lists its own requirements. Moving on to R, existing and proposed topography. S, the location of existing and proposed topographic features, water courses, etc. S, location, oh, I'm sorry, I already called that one. T is good. X, location of existing and proposed roads. Clearly, if you're proposing a road, you are not a minor site plan. Location of sidewalks and shoulders. Again, I think that would fall into that same category. Location of existing fire hydrants, cistern, wells, etc. And then the last one, location of existing and proposed underground storage tanks on the property. Kind of, once again, if you're looking at underground storage tanks, you probably are not a minor site plan. So the regulations that I think made sense to exempt are kind of, again, those things that if you really need them, you're not minor, but also in general, those things that would require you to employ a professional engineer or surveyor in order to complete the plan. So the idea here is to provide an avenue for people who really are doing something relatively minor. These are usually property owners and business owners, somebody who, a farmer, who is putting up a building, maybe adding a few parking spaces, maybe adding a porch, or putting up a minor, small temporary building. And they're not typically hiring professionals to prepare the plans for them. That's kind of the key. At least that's how I am looking at it. And I added this line in here because this is what's very common, and it's kind of a struggle with people. What do they submit? You really shouldn't submit a site plan that is on a plan that's stamped or signed, by an engineer or surveyor, and alter it and say it's your plan. That is something that people typically do. So the way I put it here was that an applicant may submit a copy of a previously approved site plan or subdivision plan with proposed alterations shown, but that's only for reference. So you can come in with your own drawing, you can show your own renderings. If you have an approved site plan and you want to show that for reference purposes, that's okay. That's I think helpful to see. So that's basically it. That was my thinking. As always, what I try to do is intervene as little as possible, within the ordinance or a regulation to kind of accomplish what we need to accomplish. So obviously we don't need to make any decisions this evening. We can take as much time with these or any issues, but I open it up to questions or thoughts.
Anybody have any questions for Jay?
Again, what I can do is share this with everyone. So if you want to have a little bit, if you want to have some time at your leisure to kind of look at this and then look through those regulations and see, are there things that you really feel shouldn't be accepted here? Or maybe there's some things that should be that I didn't, call out. So obviously I will share this with everyone. So if there aren't more questions, I'm sorry.
I think it makes sense. It covers a lot of the things that we get requests for waivers on.
Yeah.
So I think it makes sense. Thanks for doing that.
Absolutely. All right, so I'm going to close out of this and I am going to move on to
Tim
parking.
actually has a question. I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's all right.
I'm sorry.
Can't see you, but I can see you.
Just quickly, what if it impacted just notes on a drawing? Like we've run into some applicants, maybe a temp structure with, we had like days and times or months of operation. Would that still qualify here?
I mean, that would qualify in really one of two ways. So if you're not really proposing any change at all, you're just proposing a change in a condition, you could go through this procedure. We also, though, have another procedure in the ordinance that is for very minor changes to an approved site plan. And there are field changes. So really, I think in that case, it's less of a minor site plan than it's a minor modification to a condition of approval. You'd still come to the board for that. You probably wouldn't even be going through a plan submittal at all, I would think. So theoretically, yes. If you're coming in, so if, for example, you had a site plan approved and you wanted to change the there was a condition of approval on the hours of operation and you wanted to change that. That is something that you would have to come back to the board for, but you've already gone through a full site plan review. So you wouldn't even really need to apply for a waiver from all of our requirements and go through the whole site plan process. You'd just be coming in for a modification of that note, and you would prepare a revised plan with a new note that would just get signed and recorded. If that makes sense.
So it wouldn't go through this process.
It wouldn't go through this process.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Because some of those notes, contractually, depends on the note.
Right.
Clarity of the note.
But again, I think in that case, since you've already gone through the site plan review process, you don't have to do that again. But because there is a recorded site plan with those notes on them, you would have to do another, you'd have to submit another, once the planning board approved modifying the condition of approval, you'd have to submit a new plan and get that, signed. If that makes sense. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing.
One thing, Jay, in terms of the expedited plan review, say something comes before the planning board for expedited review, but the planning board feels, or the majority of the planning board feel that that review probably requires maybe a full site plan review or something different than just an expedited. Do we have discretion to tell the applicant that we want a full review? Or
Yes, I would say you do, because if you look at submission requirements, the first one here is that the applicant shall request an expedited site plan review in writing. So I think the planning board could choose to deny that request, because after looking at what's submitted, it's like this is either this doesn't meet the requirements, or this is really not a, you could conclude that it's not minor in nature.
And in terms of acceptance, so when we usually do a two-step process. We have the acceptance of the plan, and then we have the conditional approval. So at the acceptance level for an expedited review, are we looking just to, I mean, usually we ask, have abutters been notified, fees paid? Do we have all the plans that we need? Is there anything that isn't necessary or necessary to do that, or does that change? Does that not change?
That wouldn't change, because the section 130, the submission procedures, and section 140 submission requirements don't change at all. So you would still go through that process. It's just that there are fewer items that you would have to address in your application. So you still have to provide the abutters, you still have to provide a plan. You still have to meet all the requirements, the required renderings. You have to pay the application fee. So all that's still true. And there would be a vote for acceptance. They would still make their presentation, and then there would be an action on the approval.
Thank you.
And again, I'm sure everybody's going to want some time, to have a chance to take a look.
Absolutely.
All right, so I am going to close this, and I am hopefully going to move on to reshare. Oh, am I sharing it? I'm sharing a different document. I'm going to stop sharing. And then I'm going to try to share again. First, I'm going to minimize my screen. And now I'm going to try to share again. Can everyone see this?
Yes.
All right, so I'm going to move on to parking. I probably actually should. Let's see if I can. It's going to move back to our parking regulations, but I'm going to try to avoid switching back and forth between different requirements. So I do have our current parking standards in front of me. And kind of, again, one of the things that really prompted this, I mean, there's a couple of things that I know I'm kind of rehashing, was we had a challenge in applying our regulations to sites with multiple uses on them. So that was kind of one of the initial issues and concerns that kind of jumped out at me, oh golly, a couple of years ago. Other challenges, though, is the language in the ordinance in how, or in the regulations in how parking standards are measured. And the thing that, tends to jump out at me, I mean, I'll jump out at the very first one, agricultural uses, one space per employee on the largest shift. And we have a number of our parking standards are based on the number of employees, usually on the largest shift. That's really problematic because we really have no way of knowing how many employees work in any particular business. The number of employees changes over time in different businesses. And you have tenants in the same business who may change, and they're going to have different levels of staffing. There's no way to police it. There's no way to regulate it. It's just really, it's a challenging standard to apply. So as a general rule, I favor parking standards that are based on something tangible, usually square feet. That doesn't always make sense, but usually square feet. Sometimes for restaurants, it's very common to say, or certain types of restaurants, per seat, or for places of assembly. It's not uncommon to say per seat based on maximum occupancy, as an example. That's a little more fluid, but places of assembly do have maximum occupancies that are set by code. So it's at least a little bit more tangible. And something like a barber shop or a beauty salon, setting a standard by what they call chair or seat, that's a stationary thing. Again, that's fairly tangible. So generally, you know, I like to see parking regulations that are linked to something that's tangible, that you can see, and tends to change less over time. The other challenge that we often have is when you get into regulations such as Litchfield's, where there's a very long list of different types of uses, and each of them has a parking standard, and often it's slightly different. And it becomes challenging when you're changing from one establishment to another, particularly in a multi-use center, you know, of any kind. So if you've had a chance at some point to take a look at our regulations, we really go into a huge amount of detail. We go from small a to small AS. So pretty significant. So I think that the more simplicity we can add and the more flexibility we can add, I think the better. So back to multi-use sites, one of the things that's typical in a multi-use site is usually we feel that it's generally perceived that you really don't just add up all the different uses and apply the parking standard to it. And the reason for that is because you do have shared parking. Everybody isn't coming at the same time for every use. So that becomes pretty typical. So looking for a way to address that is desirable. So I spent a fair amount of time tootling around, looking for good standards or examples. A starting place for me very often is the American Planning Association. They used to actually publish pretty useful guides. There are some other guides that are put out there based on detailed calculations of use that are observed. What I have found, though, is that there's been a real shift in literature around parking. Believe it or not, parking is a thing in planning circles. There's a lot that's being talked about, written about. I've actually read a book, The High Cost of Free Parking. So that's all out there. People are into parking now. But the general trend is in urban areas to try to get away from parking minimums at all. And in part, that's to try to push more people into public transit. That's really not an option in a community like Litchfield. So I think getting rid of parking minimums in Litchfield probably doesn't make sense. I suppose that could be an arguable point. Getting rid of them altogether, I don't think would be prudent at this point. But the general trend is to try to reduce the size of parking areas and to try to avoid unnecessary parking. And the reason for that is, well, I was going to say twofold, but it's really multiple. One reason is stormwater management. As more and more communities are confronted with the need to manage stormwater and are faced with these MS4 requirements, trying to get the amount of paved area and asphalt down is significant. For groundwater recharge, generally that's also true, trying to minimize impervious surfaces. And there's also concerns around things like heat island effect. So generally the trend is, let's try to make parking fields smaller. And if we can't eliminate parking minimums, let's try to minimize them rather than maximize them. That's a real change in the approach, because 20 years ago and before that, the real focus was, and I found this in planning in general, was the biggest concern is not having enough parking and causing people to go either onto the grass fields or into the public way. And what we really want to do is try to push developments to provide the maximum amount of parking possible. That was the thrust previously. That's really changed. So that's just kind of just setting the groundwork. But what I did find is I could not really find good, consistent, and reliable guides on here standards, that a community should be looking at. Again, because the literature I found was really all over the place and was mainly focused on reducing parking and eliminating minimums. So then what I started to do was look around to some of the to other communities, looking in the region in particular, to see if there were some other communities out there that had standards that I thought made sense. In the communities that I looked at in the region, some were really just very similar to what we have now. They were a real mixture of types. Bottom line, I didn't really find, I saw a couple that had a decent, requirement here or there, but I really didn't find anything that I thought was particularly good or worthwhile. And then I came across Londonderry's parking requirements, and actually they really jumped out at me for a couple of reasons. They struck me as really well thought out. And so what I thought I would do is run through them and touch on a few areas that jumped out at me and why they jumped out at me. And it's not to suggest that we should simply copy Londonderry's parking standards. That wouldn't make sense for Litchfield. They have uses addressed that, definitely would not be uses that Litchfield would confront. And I think Litchfield also has uses that maybe Londonderry hasn't contemplated. But I liked the way they were structured. I liked the overall approach. And so I thought I would run through them. And then again, I'm happy to share this with everyone. And if anybody does have a question, by the way, as we're going through and you don't have your regulations in front of you as to what's Litchfield's current standard, let me know, because I do have it open in front of me. Just off the cuff, I think the parking stall size is very similar. We also have some nice graphics on parking areas. Maybe we could use some nicer graphics, but overall, I think those make sense. I am going to scroll down through all of this until I get to their first tables on off-street parking. And just very basically, these are actually very comparable to the regulations that we have now. So actually not a whole lot of change. The one that does jump out a little bit is mixed use residential, which is a little bit different. That is not something we addressed. These again, these are pretty typical as I'm moving through. And by the way, I've lost my visual. Can people still hear or see me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Jay. Here we can hear you, and we can see the table.
Interesting. The my active speaker box just turned blank. Anyway, that's probably my problem then. Nevertheless, a couple here again that we don't necessarily address. Live work unit. Maybe we care, maybe we don't. Where I'm starting to go here, though, is I like how the ordinance in this structure, in the way this regulation is structured, rather than listing out every single use, which is the way we do it, and providing a separate standard for each, even if they're the same or very similar. The way Londonderry does it is group a whole lot. So this is the categories: community gathering, assembly, membership, etc. They group basically everything that's going to be treated similarly in one category. I'm going to get to what FA means. That's FA, floor area, seat, or user as determined by the planning board. So basically what they've done is all of these uses have been grouped together. That makes sense. And they've actually provided 3 different ways of measuring it. So you've kind of got what I would say is the most basic, which is square footage. Next, or you can do it by seats. And again, that's pretty easy. Or you can do it by user. But you've got a wide variety of different uses that are all similar and is noted as determined by the planning board. So realistically, you're going to have an applicant proposing a certain standard. If the board feels that's because of something particular in this development, that's not that standard doesn't work for whatever reason, there are 3 options that are provided, kind of like that. Again, here the standards are based on something that's going to be pretty objective: how many fields, how many courts, how many tees. Again, I'm not going to go through every one of these, but you can kind of, this is also very typical. Again, I really don't like per staff per student, but at least when it comes to students, that's a capacity issue that you can measure. Healthcare. This is another area that I really liked. I liked the way it was done. Again, rather than listing out every single one of the uses that you see here, they've all been lumped together on what's called business, sales, and service, and the category is load generator. It's all based on floor area, and it's all based on this standard of 2 spaces per 1,000 square feet. And if you kind of look through this use, again, maybe we want all these different uses in there, maybe not, maybe there's others. But these are the types of uses that you very commonly find in a commercial building or a multi-tenant building. And there are a fair number of these that also can often interchange. In other words, one use can go out and another one can come in. The auto parts store can turn over and become a hardware store. The next category, it's not great the way their table shuts off, is business, sales, and service. Same category, but now these are called medium generators. And here they go to 3 spaces per 1,000. And again, we can agree, we can disagree on the categories of uses that are put in here. But once again, floor area, standard measure. And then finally, high generator. And I think most of us could probably agree, convenience stores, grocery stores, supermarkets, etc. Those are, I think realistically, high generators, and for 1,000. So overall, I really liked grouping the uses that in these 3 ways of high, medium, and low generator, and putting things like in the sense of parking demand together. It seemed to be easy. It seemed to make sense. And when it comes to looking at changes, kind of once again, you can, if you're changing from one of these in the same category to another, you meet the parking requirement. That probably doesn't require any different kind of review. If you're changing from a low or medium generator to a high generator, that's probably something, back to our prior conversation, that would trigger you coming back to the planning board for a change of use. And there's asterisks here, by the way, which I'm going to get to in a moment. And then there is, which I also thought was interesting, this might be overly complicated when we get to it, but this is addressing business, sales, and service multiple use sites. So these are mixed use developments, multi-tenant, retail complexes, shopping centers, and they actually have a methodology for calculating this, which I'll get to shortly. I will say, Londonderry's standards, for the most part, are less than Litchfield's. We tend to have a very general, every retail use is, 5 per 1,000. So they are lower. I think that's, again, probably consistent with the trend towards trying to make parking fields smaller. And then again, restaurants, I thought this was actually interesting. Full service sit down restaurant, half a space per seat. That's actually a pretty common standard. And then we have this grouping here, which at first struck me as odd that we're putting nightclubs and ice cream parlors in the same category. But again, it's really based on not that they're similar, but that they're similar in parking demand. And that's actually quite a high demand or high parking requirement of 10 spaces per 1,000. So the assumption is, and I'm sure there's literature to back it up or research, that the number of people who tend to patronize these types of establishments, are doing so at a high level of occupancy. That's, again, whether that's a good figure or not, that's what jumps out. The rest of these are pretty typical, I think, for what we tend to see. Possibly on the low side, but to me, again, these categories made sense. The industrial ones also, for the most part, I thought made sense. Kind of once again, you see this trend of grouping a whole lot of similar ones together. Needless to say, I mentioned things that, wouldn't make sense for Litchfield, aeronautical facilities probably being one of those. I don't know that we would ever see a trucking terminal. Maybe we would, maybe we wouldn't. I will say, I wonder if there isn't an error in a couple of these. Just this one jumped out at me. I'm going to try to clarify that with Londonderry. Self-storage facility, it's per facility and it's 6 spaces. I found that interesting that there was no relationship to size. So I'm going to check to just make sure that there wasn't, a missing word here. But nevertheless, those are the kinds of things we certainly will encounter. We have transportation facilities here, probably not. So here are the asterisks that are just worth noting. What floor area means it's limited to the interior space only. They do note there's no parking required for outdoor display space or storage area. So it's actually a little bit less. This is basically interior floor space, not necessarily gross area, for what that's worth. They do go through ADA parking requirements. I'm not going to jump through those now, although I will compare them to what we have now. The section that I want to jump to, lighting, we do all of this. Actually, I think we do a pretty good job. So forgive me for zooming through all of these sections. So this was a section that jumped out at me. I thought it was interesting. And basically, this is intended to encourage abutting sites to share parking. That's often challenging, although it does happen in certain circumstances. But I think the key here is that they do provide an incentive for doing that. So again, something that we might want to look at, we might want to think about. And this is a section that talks about the calculation of flex spaces that relates to what I just referenced. I want to jump to, this is all very interesting, but I want to jump to a couple more things. So first of all, there is a section on alternative parking standards. This is to encourage alternate modes of travel. I think this is really interesting and it's innovative. There's some parts of it I think that make sense. So previously I referenced that they want to encourage people to share parking. So here is a shared parking, a way of calculating shared parking that actually allows you to provide fewer spaces. Here again, compact auto spaces, they provide you with, in essence, a bonus for doing that. And this is the section that, so I mentioned previously, if you have a multi-use site, how do you calculate? This is a section that allows you to do it. I do think it's a little overly complicated. End of the day, what you wind up doing is you add up all of the parking requirements for the individual uses that are, say, proposed within a shopping center in those high, medium, and low categories. And then what you're required to provide is at least 2/3 of that total number. So in other words, you get a 30% discount. And that really does make sense because I mean, again, is 30% the magic number? I don't know. But it goes back to a prior point I made in that when you have a multi-use site, you don't expect everybody to be coming to each of those uses at the same time all the time. You also do expect that it's not uncommon for somebody to go into a shopping center and patronize more than one store. Obviously, they're only parking once. Few here on future parking or showing future parking areas. There's a section in here on parking mitigation. That's interesting, but you know, and maybe I shouldn't say that. Maybe it is something we want to look at. But this is basically where you incentivize people to provide options like biking, telecommuting. They actually do have a section in here on bicycle parking that the planning board actually may require. Very interesting. I don't know that we want to go that far. But again, I thought this was interesting. And I thought that if, you know, if this is an approach that the board feels makes sense, then you know, what I would be happy to do is take our existing categories, fit them into a framework like this. And again, I'm particularly interested in things like grouping them under this high generator, medium generator, low generator, putting in a section for multiple uses, and then trying to get as much possible boiled down to an objective standard like a square foot standard, and then pulling together a draft or bringing it back. So I don't know if there's any thoughts or questions on this.
Anybody have any questions for Jay?
I have one question. Maybe it's not parking, maybe it's internal traffic control, but where you have, say you have a row of, say take 102 and Hudson, where you have several different shops, could you interconnect the parking lots? So you wouldn't have to travel back onto Route 102 to get to the next location?
Yeah, I mean, I think you definitely could. And, you know, that's the kind of thing I think that we've often wanted to encourage, especially on places like 102. I think what the nice thing about a structure like this ordinance is that it actually provides you an incentive to do that, in the sense of you can actually reduce your required parking. In retrospect, it's less appealing as if you were developing something from the get-go. But I definitely think that that's something that we should be encouraging, that kind of interconnection.
Londonderry on 102, near Shaw's on 102, where Verizon and Starbucks has an excellent idea, because you can't come out onto 102. You have to have that intermediate road
Right.
between Shaw's and Verizon.
You know, I will say, ideally you do it well. South Nashua has a number of interconnected shopping centers that people may be familiar with, but they're really not, the connections are not well signed. And so it's kind of, you have to be in the know. And then you can actually go through like 3 shopping centers that are connected to the Pheasant Lane Mall, but it's hard to figure it out. But anything that you can do to get people, you know, especially people who can patronize multiple establishments on the same road, like 102, if you can get those interconnected, it's so much preferable.
So Jay, this is a little bit of outside of the scope of parking, but this was something that I was going to, just to send you more of like a, hey, check this out. This was a way of doing things. So my, the backstory is my brother is moving to Poolesville, Maryland, which is in the middle of an agricultural reserve in Montgomery County. So if you know, if you're familiar with that area of Maryland, it's a suburb of DC. So it's very highly developed, but there's this pocket of agriculture that the county has said, like, this is only agriculture. And then there's a small town of Poolesville in the middle of that. And one of the things that they did is they have this. So I was looking up the zoning regulations there just to see if there was anything, that they had done to help promote certain types of business development over others. And one of the things that they had was a table like this, and it listed out all of these different uses, and then also to the side it said, this type of use can be in this zone, and if it's certain uses needed a special exception or conditional permit or something, it was listed there also. So you can, I know that would be a huge project as far as, redoing all of the zoning and everything, but it's something to, I guess, keep in mind that we can expand this table and list other information about these different developments. So if a developer comes in and says, I want to develop this type of use, it can be in these zones, and I need these types of permits. And it was just very easy to read through. So I can send you that.
Yeah,
but
dude,
it's
that's
just something-
interesting. That would be a project, but that would be a really, user-friendly kind of guide to the zoning ordinance.
Yeah, I'll send it to you, and it's just something that I think keep in mind if we're putting together something like this. Maybe there are ways we can expand it.
Right. That's a good thought.
But
So
that's all I have.
Okay. I mean, if this way of, this approach makes sense, I'd be happy to take a stab at pulling something together.
What does the board think? There's something that we want to see. I think it's certainly interesting way of looking at it.
I think it makes it easier for the board review of plans also.
Yeah.
Instead of, because how often is it that we go through our zoning regulations and then we realize, oh wait, there's a paragraph 4 pages up that we missed and maybe applies here and that sort of thing.
True. Well,
So-
go ahead, Jay. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I mean, if there's interest, I'll go ahead and take a stab at it and bring something back.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Let's check it out, see how it jives with Litchfield.
All right, so I've got one more, and I'm going to try to just switch while I am still sharing. Can everybody see this?
Yes.
Okay. So the last one I really want to touch on, there is one more, at least on my list, but not for this evening. But the last one I want to touch on, because it came up at our last work session, was looking at solar. And do we want to address, create a solar regulation or ordinance? So in this case, we actually do have a New Hampshire model, from what I'm assuming is the New Hampshire Solar Energy, I think it's Association. And so they actually have put together this document. It is fairly recent, as you can see, April of 2018. And this really does provide a nice guide. This is something else I wanted to share with everyone. I'm just going to go through it and hit on a few highlights. But I thought this was really fairly well put together. A lot of the illustrations are good. And again, some of this may make sense. For Litchfield, some of these might not make sense. I will say that one of the pushes out there in the solar world is, and you may have seen this or been familiar with this, is basically farm-friendly ground-mounted solar arrays that are being used as a way of allowing owners of farmland to actually, gain income from the generation of solar energy, while still able to maintain their properties in agricultural use. There's a little bit that is touched on in this, but I thought that was interesting, and that's something that we would have to deal with, at a regulatory level. So the first part of this document, I think it's interesting. It's good to take a look at. I'm really going to breeze through this. and it does talk about general, solar in general at the community level. I will say this is always a moving target. Every session we have bills introduced related to net metering, related to alternative energy generation in the legislature. The last couple of efforts to do something significant have not succeeded. There's always something, though, including this year in this session. So reading about kind of the regulatory framework is always a moving target. But here we have a nice example. That is a commercial grade. Actually, I'll back up a little. That's a commercial scale one, which, as you can see, is on an active farm. So interesting for what that's worth. But this whole part of this document, which again I will share, is really kind of general background. Does make sense. Here's just some basic things they say consider, and that's important. Consider your community goals. Consider why you want to take an approach like this. Is it just to allow homeowners to generate energy, or is it to allow for commercial scale solar? And what does that look like? So those are all things to think about. I thought this was actually handy. I always struggle with when I hear, a solar array is proposed and it's so many kilowatts or megawatts. What does that really mean? So I actually thought this Solar Basics was really interesting because, again, I found it interesting. But how many solar panels would it need? What would be the size of a solar array that would be necessary for a typical home? This actually tells you. I thought that was really interesting. But it's helpful, if not in an ordinance, it's helpful to have this as background information, because it's the kind of thing that people do wonder and will want to ultimately be able to picture. What does it look like? So at any rate, and just some general information that I think is important to know if this is an approach that we want to take. And it goes through, of course, all the different types of systems. This is a really helpful section on statutory authority and limitations. Again, this is the kind of thing that we want to take a look at in any ordinance, because it really runs through what was in 2018, the RSAs that are relevant. And I think these are all still relevant. I think, as we're probably aware, municipalities do have to allow for alternative energy generation. And, you have the right to regulate it. You do have to allow it. What that means can vary, as you can see in going through all of these. Just say you have to allow it as an accessory use, not necessarily as a principal use. Again, I'm not going to go through all of these, but I think the point here is there actually are a few RSAs out there that do define what you can and can't do, when it comes to regulating solar. And then some of these aren't just can and can't do. Just backing up, I don't think Litchfield does this, but I could be wrong. Whether we provide a tax exemption for solar energy systems, do we?
Well,
Voted
not
down.
anymore.
Okay.
It was on the warrant at the last deliberative session.
Really? I missed that somehow.
Article,
Last week.
13.
yeah, Article 13. But it was, they voted against it, so.
Okay. This is a section that really is specific to historic districts, and Litchfield does not have historic districts. However, for those who are concerned about the visual impact of solar arrays, particularly in residential neighborhoods, or solar panels, there might be some, portions of this that, maybe provide good guidance for design considerations. And then this document gets into the actual model solar ordinance. And a lot of this, this is pretty, obviously, if we were to go this route, we would customize this for Litchfield, both how it would fit contextually into Litchfield's ordinance in terms of section numbers, but also, again, what makes sense. But this is I found this to be a fairly nice guide, the basic definitions that we would want to know. A lot of these are industry terms that we may be not all familiar with. Going back to parking, this is an interesting one, but if you've seen the carport ones that are popping up in a handful of places, those are actually what I would, dual benefit. They shade your vehicles, they keep parking lots cooler, and they provide solar energy. They're also expensive. So kind of, again, we don't have to go through all of these right now, at least, but you certainly can, at your leisure. And this is also one that does jump out at me for Litchfield, which is primary agricultural solar. And this is basically that scenario where you're allowing commercial grade solar on an active farm, provided the existing agricultural use is preserved at the time of installation. So significant. But again, these definitions all make sense. They're all common. And then they provide a matrix of, where it's permitted. Obviously, all of these zoning districts are not applicable to us, but this is, certainly adaptable. And then they go into specific requirements. And the value of this, and we can all do a lot more research on this, if to the extent that we want to. But they've already done a lot of research around best practices that inform these requirements, and that's, I think, really helpful. Again, I'm not going to go through all of these. I'm really just kind of going over what makes sense. By the way, reclaimed, gravel pits and quarries are great sites. Old landfills are great sites. Extra municipal land, those are also great sites, as are rooftops. So at any rate, there's a conditional use permit process that's laid out. A lot of these are the typical kinds of regulations, I think, that we would expect. But again, for somebody like myself, who I can say I feel I know a fair amount about zoning, I don't know a lot about solar energy equipment, installation, the different types. So I found this guide to be really helpful. A lot of things to think about. Glare is an issue I know that comes up. It can be particularly an abutter concern, so that's addressed in here. Noise, I can't imagine so much. Stormwater, actually, that's also an important one to consider because obviously solar panels are impervious. So again, I'm not going to run through all of these. What's nice here too at the end is that they do show some different examples. Abandonment, that's also a significant issue that does have to be addressed. We get into a lot of what I think is good detail here. And then you show some of the different ways this is done. So gaps is something you want to provide, just an illustration of how it's done properly. Here are, again, a couple of different examples, or different, I should say, it's the same example, two different shots or perspectives on a ground-mounted system. Again, these are terms that would be defined in the ordinance, and now you've got some images showing you what's meant. Again, a totally different type of what they're calling a racket. Racking equipment, racking system. That's often used for agriculture. I mentioned the carports. That's an example of what those look like. This is just a residential ground-mounted system. Residential ground-mounted systems tend to be the most controversial. This model ordinance, like most, suggests, as I think most of us would agree, that roof-mounted solar, is something that should be permitted by right. Sometimes people don't like to look at it, but that's generally accepted. Ground-mounted can be controversial, particularly if they show up in people's front yards. This does not show off very well, but there are pole-mounted systems in the back here. And again, this is shown on an active agricultural site. Here's another example of a ground-mounted system on a residential site. Again, these have been controversial in some communities. A community, and I'll share this with everyone also in the region, that has adopted an ordinance that is pretty good is Hollis. And in part that was done because these were showing up in people's yards and it caused controversy. At least in one case, it was a front yard. And so that did get people upset, and that got the town, that prompted the town to take a look at adopting an ordinance. So overall, I thought this was really a pretty good example. Of course, you know, I would take a look at what other communities have done and how they've adapted it. But kind of once again, if there's interest in pursuing this, my thinking was using this, and again, I'll share it, but using this as a guide and, you know, coming up with a draft model that would make sense for Litchfield for us to take a look at and consider for next year. That's all I've got on solar. Any questions, comments, or thoughts?
Anybody have any questions?
Would that be its own master plan chapter under, we don't have one, but energy, or would that be under
It's a good question.
housing?
Well,
Well,
actually,
businesses will use it also, so.
I mean, the ordinance would be an ordinance, but that's a really good point, because the RSAs were also amended, not that that was necessary necessarily, but you can do an energy section of your master plan, and you know, I think it would actually make sense for us to pursue that. That would include alternative energy, but not only, it would be broader than that. So I do think that's something to think about.
Excellent.
And you know, related to that, we did touch on this in the transportation transportation chapter of the master plan, but one of the things that there's, you know, no doubt we're going to be seeing a lot more of, and you know, hopefully we'll see some funding, but you're also going to see definitely a lot of interest in is increasing electrical vehicle charging stations, and that's something that an energy chapter could consider as well.
I think I'd almost like to see it more just incorporated in the chapters that we already have, because I think we already have solar mentioned in community design.
Yeah.
It says something like, you know, as long as it's not imposing on neighbors or something like that. Like it's discouraged if it's, you know, imposing on neighbors. But rather than having like its own separate place to go look for it, I think I'd rather see it amongst, you know, like if solar farm might be a part of permitted use of a zone in town. Something like that, but it
So
could
rather
go-
than a
it could go either
freestanding
way.
solar ordinance, integrating solar into the existing sections?
I guess I could see it either way, because then, of course, if we need to change something, we also don't want to have to change it in 7 different places.
Right.
And we might have
Um,
wind power might be next.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
why
I'm
don't
not sure. I have to think about it.
I mean, if there's interest in pursuing the solar, you know, solar as a potential zoning amendment, what I could do is at least come up with a draft that has the requirements that I think make sense for Litchfield, and we can look at them in one place and then decide if we think it makes sense to really put these in different places, we can do that. But at least the requirements themselves, we would be able to look at all at once, and then we could figure out how to integrate them after
Okay.
that. If we have a
sounds like a great
consensus around
idea.
the requirements themselves, then we can take the next step.
I like that idea.
Okay, I'll take a stab at that. And I guess I'll just, you know, leave it by, you know, unless other people have questions, by editorializing that. I think the piece that I find the most appealing is, maybe not the most appealing, but that is appealing, is the possibility of integrating solar with agriculture, and that there may be an opportunity there that's a real win-win.
Mhm.
So I will come back with that. And otherwise, I am going to stop sharing. Well, I'm going to close out of this one anyway. So that's all I have for regulations for today.
I have something about regulations, if Jay's finished, and if there's nothing else.
Go ahead.
Say that again?
You can go ahead, sure.
Okay. Just after listening to, because I've been listening to these Hudson Logistics Center meetings, and I think this year we need to come up with something to get a handle on distribution centers if they were to be proposed in Litchfield. Going through our ordinances right now, we allow warehouses, but there's no limit on size, and there's not really anything about maximum traffic impact. Like if you think about the things that cause the distribution centers to be problematic are the traffic impact, their unsightliness, their sound, and hours of operation. So I think we need to look at getting some kind of handle around putting something in our zoning ordinances that says something like max warehouse size. Right now we have a max retail space size of 20,000 feet because we're trying to discourage things like Targets and things being built. So I don't know if it's a limit on bay doors, maybe to limit the amount of trucks that go in and out, because I don't think that the warehouse like LKQ doesn't give as much of an impact as, say, a Amazon distribution center would, because they're low traffic. You can't see them from Charles Bancroft. So it's that's like a balance there of what type of warehouse we would like to see if a developer chose to propose that. So yeah, so I think it's just something that we need to address this year to have ready for March of next year.
I think that's an excellent point, and I think to your point, we address warehouses, but the modern distribution facility of today and the fulfillment centers of today are not the same thing as warehouses were years ago. That really is an excellent point. The traffic impacts are completely different. The operations are completely different, and being silent on that is not a good thing.
And what we're seeing right now in Hudson is they meet all of the zoning regulations. So there's obviously public outcry against it, and there's probably some public for it, but it's kind of scary to think, like you go through it thinking, oh, well, that's not going to happen here. But now we're seeing all the farms like Darko's being sold. So it's happening. It's going to happen. So I think we need to get ahead of it.
I think that's a good point.
Yeah.
And, not just Hudson. I know there's one, I think, that was being proposed in Kingston, New Hampshire as well. So this, these things are starting to sort of pop up, in different places. So it may be a good idea to maybe be a little bit more proactive on it.
Have the Raymond Walmart warehouse that we almost had here, but they didn't have a traffic way to get out of here.
Yep. I can definitely start taking a look at, I'll take a look at the literature in some other communities, and both on definitions and making sure that we're defining things appropriately. And then we can, I'd be happy to take a stab at some requirements, restrictions that might make sense.
Okay, and I'll send you a couple of the ideas that I have jotted down, like common problem themes that Hudson is dealing with. Yeah.
That would be great. I think it'd be really helpful.
That's all I had on that.
Okay.
Anybody have anything else?
I have, I don't know how much more you want to add to your plate, but as I was spring cleaning my files, I came across a draft sign ordinance that we were going to do when Steve Wagner was here quite a while ago. And he had a nice sign permit at the end, and it looks like the ordinance itself wasn't finished. He started it and got partway through the definitions and into permitted signs. But what I was impressed with this, the application for a sign permit was good.
Mhm.
So I don't know if you want me to send that off to Jay to take a look at.
Would that be something, Jay, you'd be interested in?
Sure. Yeah, definitely send it. You know, and these are all things that we could take a look at a workshop, and then at any point we can make a decision which ones we want to go forward, maybe all, but you know, we can select down the road as to which ones we think are really priority.
Okay.
Sounds good.
So
thank
yeah,
you
yeah, do send it.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much, Jay, for all your hard work as usual. This stuff. We appreciate it. Okay. Number 3 is letter of support for Pinecrest Sidewalk grant application. Jay, are you speaking to this one as well?
I'm going to share again if everybody can see. So I think everybody is aware of this, at least to some level. This was a recommendation. It was actually a specific recommendation in the master plan. And as I may have mentioned previously, when we did the community facility survey, this was not really a community facility, but it really, there were a number of comments that popped up in the comments section when we were asking people about improvements that they wanted to see. This came up unsolicited. But nevertheless, the map that you are looking at now shows Litchfield's only existing stretch of sidewalk, or just about its only existing stretch of sidewalk. I'm sure there's some walkways that connects Griffin Memorial School on 3A, goes down to Pinecrest, past McElwain, so it provides a connection to the middle school, and it actually ends at Hildreth. And then obviously we have our multi-use path, which runs down the spine of the town along Albuquerque, obviously very popular. And that provides really excellent connections. Not only do 70% of the people in Litchfield live within walking distance of that multi-use path, it provides connections to Campbell High School, to Darrah Pond, the town hall complex, state forest. So it's really connecting some key institutional, recreational, educational institutions in town. So what's proposed is to build a new section of sidewalk along the northern side of Pinecrest to connect the existing sidewalk to the multi-use path. And basically what that would wind up doing is connecting all 3 of the schools in town with the parks and the institutions that I previously mentioned. So it really has the potential to be a great project. There are other areas, I think, where sidewalk improvements make sense, but this one really does jump out as a priority because, again, you've got that existing piece, and this is just a great opportunity to make these connections. The opportunity on the funding side that has come up is the state has released a new round of federal transportation alternative program grants. And essentially, that is a federal grant program funneled through the states that funds mainly bicycle and pedestrian related improvements. So that's, you know, bike and pedestrian trails. It could be bike lanes. It could be sidewalks. It could be, you know, putting in crosswalks. But it's basically about funding bicycle and pedestrian improvements. It's an 80-20 grant. So the federal funds will cover 80% of the project. The town would have to come up with its own 20% match. I'm getting better numbers from Lou Perrin, but the back of the envelope is it's just over $500,000 to make these improvements. Pinecrest is particularly nice because there are no driveways directly on Pinecrest. So you're not dealing with a whole bunch of mailboxes. There's not a bunch of interruptions. The ground is largely level. The soils are sandy. You're not looking at blasting. And this can be accomplished entirely within the town's existing right-of-way. So it really is a relatively easy project. The applications are due Friday. I'm helping with filing the application. At this point, it's highly competitive. So how good our chances are, I don't know. It's probably fair to say that our region is guaranteed one application, but there's pretty heavy competition this time. So we have 7 applications that are moving forward from our region. And again, only one of them is going to get funded. I do think this is a good project. I think it checks off a lot of the boxes. It's also one of the less expensive ones. The maximum grant that you can go for is $1 million federal, 1.2 million in total project cost. So this is probably going to come in at about half the maximum grant amount. So whether they see that as a good thing or not, I don't know. But it doesn't have some of the obstacles that some other projects do, such as there is no need to acquire right away. So these things could speak well for it. But again, the application is due Friday. And if the planning board were willing to provide a letter of support, that could certainly help the town in making its case. And I'll to that point, I'll back up a little bit. Letters of support, are common when it comes to grants. When it comes to this particular grant, historically, the DOT distributes these funds, and the last time these were out were 2 years ago. But historically, New Hampshire has not fared very well in actually getting those dollars expended. So they lapse. And that's causing a fair amount of anxiety. And so this time around, the DOT is paying more attention than in the past as to basically whether or not these are projects that have the support that's necessary to move through and to actually get funded. What they're finding is that the dollars aren't getting spent because in some cases the match has gone to town meeting and has not passed, so the project doesn't move forward. Maybe it takes a couple of times. Sometimes they've found that the people who were applying for the grant may have been enthusiastic, but the support really wasn't there. Like saying the Board of Selectmen perhaps really wasn't supportive. And sometimes it's because of other obstacles, such as I mentioned. They need to acquire right away, and they're having a hard time and may have to go through eminent domain proceedings, and that becomes a huge deal. Or they encounter some sort of significant obstacle to construction, and maybe the dollars have gone up because of that. So again, I think in this case, in terms of physical obstructions, I don't think they're there. The right-of-way isn't a challenge. But back to my point on letters of support, what they're looking for is letters of support that are meaningful. And that means coming from a Board of Selectmen, coming from a school board or a planning board, not necessarily just the number of letters, but if it's fair for me to say, the quality, because of who they're coming from. And they're looking to see that these projects that are proposed have some basis in a master plan or some other planning document that shows that it's gone through some sort of a process. So at any rate, there was a long introduction, but if the board is willing, a letter of support from the planning board would be great.
Okay.
By Friday,
What's that?
before Friday.
Yes, before Friday.
For Friday, yes.
What does the board think? Do you think this is something that we would like to support? Sounds like it's something that would be great for the town. And I don't know if the board, Kim, I don't know if the Board of Selectmen would be interested in maybe doing some sort of letter as well. I know that you're not meeting now, but
They meet after Friday, but I could forward it over.
Right.
well,
You went in front of them, right, Jay?
Yes, I did. And I did talk to Troy about getting a letter.
okay, all right. I just want to make
Okay.
sure.
I think it'd be a nice way to connect Albuquerque, where a lot of kids are riding their bikes and they're safer near the roadways, and connecting it to the school systems, the playgrounds down there where the kids are used to playing. I think having a connection where they can safely get from Albuquerque down to the schools through a sidewalk or something that's a little bit safer than on the road would be beneficial for sure.
Yeah,
It ties to the SIP plan, right?
yeah.
It's mentioned in the SIP as well, right?
So yeah, I mean, I'm perfectly happy to draft something if the board wants to go that route. If you think it's something that, worthwhile, I'm happy to do it. I think it's a great thing and,
Well, I can speak from experience living right there that there are a lot of pedestrian traffic there. And even people coming from as far as Canberra down on the other side of Albuquerque walk up that way.
and it would be nice to connect Albuquerque, I would think, to have another access.
Gets all the way to the high school. You get all the schools.
Right. So there's a,
But Canberra is one of the senior housing, and they, that would even just about connect them to Albuquerque. Down to Pinecrest. Yeah.
I almost wish it went further down Pinecrest. Because there are I do see a lot of senior citizens walking, especially between Pinecrest and Albuquerque on the east side.
Can you guys hear me?
yes.
Okay, I didn't test my microphone earlier, so I wasn't sure if anything I said earlier was actually there. So,
Oh, we can hear you.
Yeah, I'm curious, Jay, did school boards ever write these letters of support? Because especially if they're proposing an elementary school to be built at the same place as the middle school, this would allow access to whatever the requirement is for kids that walk to school,
Right.
provide safe access
It's a
where
good
they're not
point.
bused.
I should have reached that sooner, but I could give that a try.
Believe their meeting is tomorrow. They're usually the day after us, I think.
Okay. I'll reach out in the morning then.
But have they committed to building a school where they would like? And I don't know where they
No, they're not
have
committed.
some.
No, I think
Nothing's been committed, no.
discussion, I mean, I think there's a lot of support for,
Oh, I know they want a new school, but do they have an idea where they would want it? Has that even been discussed?
Would they own land between the middle school and the Griffin School? I guess they were talking in that area.
Because all of a sudden they build a school outside of this path,
Yeah, no, I think it's going to be in this area here. That was my understanding, is it'd be on existing land
Right.
near the middle school.
Okay.
as I said, I'd be happy to do that for the planning board.
Does that need a motion?
Well, I was just gonna say, if we want to do a motion, we could certainly do a motion to draft it.
I'll make that motion to draft a letter of support for the sidewalk,
second.
sidewalk grant. Yeah.
Who seconded?
Who was the second?
Curtis.
Curtis? Okay, thanks, Curtis. All right, so we have a motion, have a second. Do we have any further discussion?
I'm sorry, I have a piece of discussion. This is Josh.
Yes.
Jay, you went through kind of some scenarios where possibly if we did get it, it would lapse. Are we confident that we can match this and we have the support for that?
Well, I think that's certainly the hope. Can't speak for what town meeting would do next year. But I think that if we've got the support of, key leadership in town, and I think we've seen that there is at least some support in the community, hopefully a case could be made, if we succeed in getting the grant, that we would be able to raise that match.
So we feel optimistic that we could get support.
It's always a risk, but yes.
Okay. No more discussion.
Okay. Any further discussion? Okay. All those in favor of a letter of support from the planning board for the Pinecrest sidewalk grant application. Please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Those abstained? Motion passes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 0, 0. Okay.
And do you want me to reach out to Troy tomorrow? Is Jay still there?
Yeah, Jason.
Yes,
Oh, he looked frozen there.
That's all right.
All right, so I'll reach out to Troy and CC you about this as well, right?
okay, that'd be great.
Because the board doesn't meet till after Friday, so let him work on this, right?
Yes, and I think he was thinking that he would just write something based on the last vote that the board took.
Okay. Okay.
Very good. All right. So we'll get that to you, Jay.
Thank you.
All right. Moving on, committee reports. Any reports from any committees? Kim, did you have anything about NRPC?
NRPC meets tomorrow
Tomorrow.
at 7 p.m. Open to the public, and the meeting information is on their website. The Heritage Commission meets Tuesday, April 13th, and that meeting information will also be on the town website. And the Board of Selectmen meets March 22nd after Friday at 6:30 p.m. And that information's on the town website also.
Okay. Thank you. Conservation Commission met at the beginning of the month, first week of the month, March 4th.
Next meeting is April 1st.
And the next meeting is April 1st. I wasn't at the March 4th meeting. I was actually at the Lower Merrimack Local River Advisory Committee Zoom meeting, which was held on that same night. So I had a bit of a conflict, but I attended that one. The Capital Improvement Committee, I'm hoping to get a meeting started at some point. I did email Steve Weber and Troy today to find out from them what the availability is and when we would like to do that. They did mention that after deliberative session and town meeting that they would be willing to perhaps have a meeting. So we're going to try to get that process started again and go forward.
And the ZBA is April 13th.
And the ZBA is April 13th. So I think that's everything I have. Okay. Approval of the minutes of the March 2nd, 2021 meeting. Did everybody have an opportunity to take a look at those? Have any questions? Concerns? Thing look okay. Let's see, I thought they were pretty good. Somebody wants to entertain a motion to approve them, so we can certainly do that as well.
I'll make a motion to approve them.
All right, I have a motion to approve. Do I have of the minutes of March 2nd? Do I have a second?
Second.
Seconded. Any discussion? All right, all those in favor of approval of the March 2nd meeting minutes, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Abstained? All right, motion passes 6-0-0. Any other business? Joan, do you have anything this evening? Okay.
So I am-
All right, Jay, do you have anything else? Okay.
I can give you the latest on the Hudson Logistics Center.
Yes, right, sure, absolutely.
They had a meeting on March 10th, and let's see, it was a big meeting. It was a long one, so I have a couple of pages of notes here. They submitted an application for a lot line relocation to basically keep or to combine the parcel into one parcel, so that they would actually have internal private roads that they would take care of instead of having the town take care of those as public roads. So they had Public Works, Police, and Fire present and basically say that there was no real impact to the town. Police were confident that there would not require any extra officers or equipment to be able to respond to any calls where the plan approved. The fire department had said that they actually would need to lean a little extra harder on the regional hazardous material teams and tower trucks, which are different than ladder trucks because they have, from what I understand, the bucket at the top of the ladder. So you can have a bunch of equipment and everything with you rather than lugging that up a ladder with you. So that's something that Hudson does not have, but the surrounding towns do have. And then that came into play later they presented some project mitigation strategies. And so they are offering Hudson some very big mitigation things like funding towards school STEM programs, buying that tower truck, or at least giving the town 1.4 million towards that tower fire truck. $1 million for general public safety, funding for a potential boat ramp or shoreline improvement, funding towards that regional hazmat program, funding towards further master plan improvement efforts. What else was there? Increasing their Hudson community fee, which I guess is a fee that the town would be collecting either way, but they would be adding on to that. On top of the minimum requirement, some funding for additional recreation and riverfront projects that Hudson has considered in the past, but hasn't really moved forward on due to lack of funding, and additional funding towards general public safety projects for a total of $9.7 million. And that's in addition to the additional the projected 4.6 to 4.8 million in annual tax revenue by this project. They also had the lawyers come up and basically said they meet every single zoning requirement. They have adjusted their plan multiple times as they wanted to with the town to change the layout of the plan and add I didn't write down the number of acres of conservation area and buffering that would end up going in around these buildings to help mitigate the sound and to promote naturalization of the land that was originally golf course land. And so it's basically the the lawyers standing up and saying, we've done everything you've asked, and this is our final presentation, and we hope that you all will consider this a good compromise. And then that was when they presented that project mitigation strategy package. And they did say they tried to collect some data on some existing traffic impacts from existing sites that they have, but their data basically got interrupted by that big frost that happened down south. So the data collection, it wasn't true data because everything got shut down essentially for that week. And so instead they analyzed the peak season traffic versus not improving peak season, as in like the shopping season, what they're expecting for traffic versus not doing any of the improvements that would come along with the projects being built. And they're saying that essentially the only increase that you see is at that Green Meadow intersection, and it's only by about 5 seconds per wait time. And for in the PM, there'd be a small impact of average of half a second at Sagamore Bridge, 2 seconds at the Sam's Club intersection, and about 10 seconds at that Green Meadow intersection. So they did admit that And this is a just an analysis. So they did say that they are expecting some traffic increase during those peak times, but they're saying it's very minimal. That concluded their presentations, and they're going to have one final public input session on, it's either March 24th or March 25th. I believe it should be the 24th, but the motion was made for the 25th, so I'm not sure how they're handling that. So if we wanted to, if there was anything else that we wanted to submit as far as public input to the town of Hudson, we would have to do it before that meeting. And that's all it was.
Okay. Thank you, Kate.
That was super comprehensive. How long did you have to sit through the meeting?
Well, luckily I could just put my headphones on, and I was installing shelves at the time, so it was very exciting. But usually I would do it while I was driving. I did have to save this for something so I could write notes on it, because there was no way I could retain all that.
Was it just a presentation by the applicant, or did the people from Save Hudson, New Hampshire chime in? Have anybody have anything to say there? Do you know?
They didn't have time for public input because I believe at the time there would only have been about an hour left in the meeting, and they knew there was going to be more than an hour of public input. So they chose to continue it and have this next meeting dedicated to that public input. So I would expect that they would have something to say there.
Oh, I did notice an email this afternoon from Save Hudson to the governor. They want to meet with the governor.
Oh, really? Okay. Interesting. Right. Certainly, I mean, we can certainly maybe do another letter to the planning board in Hudson, just, sort of citing. I don't know if it's going to be successful, but I mean, it's certainly something we can do if you guys want to do that.
Yeah, I don't know if we have any more
Sounds like
input than
I
we've
mean,
already said.
Yeah. So, but I think we've pretty much addressed most of the issues that the issue of traffic specifically. In terms of, it would have been nice, I think, if they had given us a little bit more information about, Route 3A and 102. And whether that has, been, discussed. I know that.
The applicant's stance on that is that there's no impact that far up 102. That's their stance.
Okay.
But as far as checking that, monitoring that and before and after, I haven't heard anything.
Yeah. Well, it should be interesting to see what happens with public comment. I mean, sure, there'll be a lot at that point. I think at that time, those people will be discussing it. I would hope. Okay. Anybody have anything else? Just it was funny, the last meeting we had, and so I'm sitting at home on Saturday, and my mom came over to me and she said, "Oh, you're in the paper." And I went, "We're in the paper?" And she goes, "Yeah. Didn't you read the union leader?" And so she gives me the union leader, and I look, and there we are, the planning board, Litchfield, got press. So
That's why I cited what I really said to you.
What was it about?
about the dock hole stables.
So I
being turned into-
sent you the notes and what I read. You saw that? Hopefully it matches the paper.
So I thought that I wasn't mentioned, but I know, you were
I was
mentioned.
mentioned.
You were mentioned. So Jim was
That's why it
mentioned.
was sent to the record.
Other people were mentioned. So I was like, okay.
You have the record, right? You can attach it to the minutes if you'd like. You have my handwritten notes and what I actually read.
Okay, well, send me the article if you have it. Also, Troy sent out the people that need to be reappointed. Did you get that email?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, yeah. It
Um,
was 3, I think you were one, one you were, Curtis,
Curtis, I think Jim, I think was one.
or no?
I don't think it
No,
was
you were
me. I think
22.
I'm till 2023. I think,
There's 3 people, I think.
yeah.
So Ron, maybe?
To take a look at the email for a second.
Yes. Just came in this afternoon.
Yeah, I did see that. Troy, annual appointments. Yeah, Joshua and James. So,
And Curtis?
no, it doesn't say
It's
Curtis,
Joshua and James?
just Joshua and James. That's what I have here.
Okay.
I know, this is Josh. I know me and James were appointed at the same time. Is that something we gotta, when is that up? Is that,
It's
is this,
up in March, so you have to
Yeah,
get
it's the end of March.
reappointed and then just sign the paperwork again. Come into
Yeah.
town clerk's office.
This has to be updated as well,
What's that?
the website of the roles.
Oh, okay. So,
I did,
John
to
Bruno.
jump her now.
I did update the planning board site.
Okay.
Okay,
All right, I'll take a look at it. And get a chance to look at
You
that.
just have to email, if they want to continue on, email
Okay.
Troy.
So, I mean, yeah, I mean, you guys, I assume interested in continuing on with the planning board. We're happy to have you, of course. And if you want, I'll just let Troy know that you guys are up for reappointment.
That's fine with me, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Okay, great. And that's good with you, Josh?
yep.
Okay, great. So I'll send an email out to Troy and let him know that you guys are all set. Thank you. I have no further business this evening. Our next meeting will be in April. And hope everyone had an opportunity to get out and vote March 9th. And I guess I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
We have a motion to adjourn. We have a second.
Okay.
Second. All right. All those in favor of adjourning, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, abstained, motion passes 6-0-0. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this evening, and we'll see you in April. And hopefully spring is on the way, and happy St. Patrick's Day to everybody, if anyone celebrates St. Patrick's Day. And we'll see you guys soon. So.